Welcome back to Sleepy Tech Stories. I'm your host, and tonight we're beginning a journey through one of humanity's oldest obsessions, keeping secrets. Before we had passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the word password, yes, those are still the most common passwords in 2025. Humans have been creating codes, ciphers, and secret ways to communicate for over 4,000 years. This is episode 1 of the Password Wars, a 4-part series exploring how we protected our most valuable information, from ancient Mesopotamian clay tablets to the biometric scanners in your smartphone. Tonight, we're traveling back to the very beginning. To understand why your laptop asks for a password, we need to understand why a Roman general needed a secret word to enter his own camp. To appreciate why two-factor authentication exists, we should know about the ingenious methods ancient spies used to verify each other's identities. But here's what's truly fascinating, as we'll discover tonight. Every single principle of modern password security was invented thousands of years ago. You're participating in an unbroken tradition that connects you to Babylonian merchants, Roman centurions, medieval monks, Renaissance diplomats, and Enlightenment inventors. We'll meet the world's first password crackers. Discover the original two-factor authentication systems. How Greek generals developed the first systematic military cryptography. How Islamic scholars created the mathematical foundations of modern encryption. And how medieval European courts turned secret communication into a high art. And learn why the fundamental challenges of keeping secrets haven't changed since the dawn of civilization, but why they worked, and why the same principles still protect your digital life today. You're using mental processes that have been refined and perfected over 40 centuries of human ingenuity. The concept of changing passwords regularly. The Romans did it first. Multi-factor authentication. Ancient Greek spies were using it in 400 before the Common Era. Password complexity requirements. Medieval monks wrote the first guidelines in the 12th century, looking for personal information, understanding human behavior patterns. These techniques were being used by ancient cryptanalysts to break enemy codes over 2 millennia ago. Think about that for a moment. When you create a password today, you're not just protecting your email or your bank account. Tonight's journey will take us from the dusty archives of ancient Mesopotamia to the mechanical workshops of Thomas Jefferson. We'll explore how ancient Egyptian priests used hieroglyphic codes to protect religious mysteries. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us explore the fascinating world of ancient codes and the personal passwords that shaped how we think about security today. But to truly, our story begins around 1900 before the Common Era in ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq. Passwords. We need to paint a picture of this remarkable civilization that gave us writing, mathematics, astronomy, and the first cities in human history. Picture yourself standing in the great marketplace of Babylon around 1800 before the Common Era. You purchased a massive shipment of lapis lazuli, the brilliant blue stone more valuable than gold, from traders who carried it over 1,500 miles from the mountains of Afghanistan. Take the cuneiform alphabet, those wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, and reverse it completely. It's a password system. Your business partner in Mari doesn't just need to know how to read cuneiform. Thousands of people can do that. He needs to know the specific secret that you've both agreed upon. He needs to know that when he receives a tablet from you, he should reverse the alphabet to decode it. These tablets suggest that merchants were writing down their cipher keys, essentially keeping their passwords on sticky notes, just like people do today. The first symbol becomes the last, the second becomes the second to last, and so on. These instructions include requirements that cipher keys should be based on religious phrases known only to members of specific temples. You couldn't just give someone a cipher key and expect them to use it correctly. They needed to understand the principles behind the system. It also shows us that the weakest link in any security system has always been human behavior. But when you read every fifth word, it becomes a detailed report on the military preparations of a neighboring city-state. They developed a system of seal stones, small carved stones that could be pressed into clay to create unique marks. These seals served as both signatures and cipher keys. The password here isn't just knowing how to decode the message. It's knowing that there's a hidden message at all. When sending an encrypted message, he would press his seal into the clay tablet. The seal stone was like a public key. It could be seen by anyone, but only people who understood the system could use it to decode messages. The pattern of the seal would indicate which cipher system to use to decode the message. When the Persian Empire conquered Babylon in 539 before the Common Era, they reportedly spent months trying to decode the temple archives before finally giving up and forcing the surviving priests to translate them. They gave us the concepts of shared secret knowledge, regular password changes, password complexity requirements, steganography, key distribution, and multi-factor authentication. Every time you log in to a website today, you're using principles that were first developed in the dusty marketplaces and sacred temples of ancient Mesopotamia, and something you are. Second, you needed to know the mathematical formula for shifting the symbols. This formula was based on astronomical calculations that only trained priests understood. Third, you needed to know the religious context that determined when to apply which parts of the system. Only people who had seen the merchant's seal before would know which cipher to apply, along with instructions that roughly translate to, the novice scribe must master the simple reversals before attempting the sacred substitutions. They were only discovered when computers were used to analyze the statistical patterns in large collections of tablets. These priests were responsible for maintaining the calendar, predicting eclipses, and preserving the mathematical knowledge that kept Babylonian civilization running. The signs of the gods must not be revealed to the uninitiated. They would write innocent-looking business correspondence on clay tablets, but embed secret information in specific patterns. For example, every seventh word might be part of the real message, or the first letter of each line might spell out crucial information. The Assyrian traders now mock our secret words. We must create new signs before the moon is full again. Your message, gold hidden in well, becomes a series of symbols that look like complete gibberish to anyone who doesn't know the system, that only authorized people possessed. Past bandits who would kill for a fraction of your cargo's value, and through the hands of messengers who might be bribed or tortured for information. If word of your purchase reaches the wrong ears, you could lose everything. Your cargo, your profit, possibly your life. The noise is overwhelming. Dozens of languages being spoken simultaneously. The bleating of camels and donkeys. The clink of metal weights measuring precious goods. You're a successful merchant named Shamash Nasser, and you've just completed the deal of a lifetime. Here's your problem. The message must travel 200 miles through territory controlled by rival city-states. So what do? You create one of humanity's first passwords. But here's what makes this truly revolutionary. This isn't just a code. This is the birth of cryptography, the art of writing in secret codes. Think about it. When you type your password into your laptop, you're essentially proving that you know a secret that only you and the computer should know. But the Mesopotamians quickly discovered something that still plagues password security today: the human factor. Shows us clay tablets from around 1900 BCE that contain what appear to be decoded messages alongside their encrypted versions. One particularly fascinating tablet, discovered in the 1950s and now housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, contains a message that appears to be a complaint from one merchant to another about a compromised cipher. This is remarkable because it shows us that even 4,000 years ago, people understood that passwords needed to be changed regularly when they were compromised. Contains what appears to be one tablet dating to around 1750 before the Common Era. Contains what appears to be a training exercise for scribes learning cryptography. This shows us that even in ancient times, people understood that password security required training and discipline. The Mesopotamians also developed the concept of steganography, hiding the very existence of a secret message. One remarkable example, discovered at the ancient city of Nuzi, appears to be a routine inventory of barley and wool. This technique was so sophisticated that it took modern archaeologists decades to recognize these hidden messages. The Mesopotamians also understood the importance of what we now call key distribution, the problem of how to securely share password information with authorized people. Here's how it worked. A merchant would have a personal seal stone with a unique carved design. This is remarkably similar to modern public key cryptography. But perhaps the most sophisticated Mesopotamian password system was developed by the priests of Marduk in Babylon around 1600 BCE. The priests developed a multi-layered cipher system that required 3 different types of secret knowledge to decode. This is essentially a 3-factor authentication system. Something you know, something you can calculate. Archaeological evidence suggests that this system was so secure that it was used for over 500 years without being broken. The Mesopotamian legacy in password security is profound. Egyptian hieroglyphic codes, the sacred secrets music, shifts to mysterious Egyptian tones with subtle temple ambience. While the Mesopotamians were developing commercial cryptography, their neighbors along the Nile River were creating something even more sophisticated: the world's first systematic approach to protecting sacred knowledge through coded writing. Ancient Egypt was unjust the land of pyramids and pharaohs. It was a civilization that understood the power of information control. For over 3,000 years, Egyptian priests, scribes, and officials used increasingly complex systems of coded hieroglyphs to protect everything from religious mysteries to state secrets to medical knowledge. Let's travel to the Temple of Karnak around 1400 before the Common Era. During the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, you're a young priest in training named Khemwaset, and you've just been granted access to the temple's inner sanctum, the house of life where the most sacred texts are kept. These are cryptographic hieroglyphs, symbols that look familiar but carry hidden meanings known only to the initiated. The priests call this system MDWNTR, the words of the gods, and learning it is a process that takes decades. A symbol that normally meant water might represent the concept of time in a coded text. First, you had to be able to read hieroglyphs at all, a skill possessed by less than 1% of the population. The tomb contains what appears to be a standard biographical inscription praising the deceased nobleman's achievements. But hidden within the text is a detailed account of a political conspiracy against the pharaoh, encoded using a system where certain hieroglyphs represent numbers, and the numbers correspond to words in a sacred text that only high-ranking officials would know. Second, you had to know that the text was coded, and the medical procedures are described in reverse order. You have to read the treatment steps backwards to perform them correctly. It protected valuable medical knowledge from unauthorized use. It ensured that only properly trained physicians could access the information, and it created a form of quality control. If you couldn't decode the instructions, you weren't qualified to perform the procedures. On the surface, it's a standard royal titulary listing the pharaoh's names and achievements, but using different cryptographic keys, the same text reveals. Third, you had to know which specific cryptographic system was being used. And fourth, you had to understand the religious or philosophical context that gave the coded symbols their hidden meanings. They developed a system called enigmatic writing, where the same text could be read in multiple ways depending on which decoding method you used. A single hieroglyphic inscription might contain a public message praising the pharaoh, a private message with political information for court officials, and a secret message with religious instructions for priests. A symbol for bird might represent wisdom or secret knowledge. When the astronomical conditions changed, they would need to learn a new decoding method. The priests of Alexandria created a system that combined hieroglyphic cryptography with Greek mathematical principles. This is remarkably similar to modern time-based one-time passwords used in two-factor authentication systems. Instead of simple symbol substitution, the cipher used mathematical formulas to transform the text. The password wasn't just a key phrase. It was a mathematical equation that determined how to encode and decode the message. The walls around you are covered with hieroglyphs, but these aren't the simple pictographs that tourists see today. Hidden within the Greek text are numerical patterns that, when applied to the hieroglyphic text, reveal additional information not present in the standard translation. The Egyptian approach to cryptography was fundamentally different from the Mesopotamian system. Egyptian cryptographic systems were unjust about keeping information secret. They were about ensuring that people only had access to the information they needed for their specific roles and responsibilities. Papyrus scrolls from the New Kingdom period contain medical and magical texts that begin with coded instructions for reading the rest of the document. The Temple of Dendora contains inscriptions that describe a system where the decoding method for certain texts changed based on the position of specific stars, the phase of the moon, or the flooding of the Nile. They understood that the best security systems have multiple layers, that different types of information require different levels of protection, and that the most secure passwords are those that require specialized knowledge to use effectively. The papyrus begins with what appears to be a religious invocation, but when decoded using the acrophonic system, it becomes a set of instructions to read the healing words, count 7 from each sacred sign, then reverse the order of the house of life. These instructions, written in cryptographic hieroglyphs, essentially function as passwords. You need to decode them correctly to understand how to read the main text. While Babylonian merchants used codes to protect commercial information, Egyptian priests used them to protect divine knowledge. Instead of using a hieroglyph for its normal meaning, you would use it to represent the first sound of the word it normally represented. For example, the hieroglyph for house might be used to represent just the P sound in a coded message. This wasn't just about keeping secrets. It was about maintaining the cosmic order that kept the universe functioning. The simplest Egyptian cipher system involved what modern cryptographers call acrophonic substitution. But the Egyptians quickly developed much more sophisticated systems. They created cryptographic hieroglyphs, symbols that looked like normal hieroglyphs but had completely different meanings in coded contexts. What made this system incredibly secure was that you needed multiple layers of knowledge to decode it. One of the most remarkable examples of Egyptian cryptography comes from the tomb of Kumhotep II at Beni Hazen, dating to around 1900 before the Common Era. This system remained unbroken for over 4,000 years. It was only decoded in 1994 when computer analysis revealed the numerical patterns hidden in the text. The Egyptians also developed what might be the first password-protected documents. One famous example is the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical text dating to around 1600 before the Common Era. Following these instructions reveals that the medical text uses a complex cipher, where every seventh hieroglyph is part of the real message. This system served multiple purposes. The Egyptians also understood the concept of security through obscurity. The tomb of Ramesses I, dating to around 1100 before the Common Era, contains an inscription that demonstrates this multi-layered approach, a detailed account of the pharaoh's military campaigns, instructions for performing specific religious rituals, a hidden criticism of the pharaoh's policies, mathematical formulas for calculating astronomical events. Each layer required different knowledge to decode, creating a sophisticated information security system that could protect multiple types of sensitive information simultaneously. The Egyptian priests also developed the concept of temporal passwords, cipher keys that changed based on astronomical events. This meant that even if someone learned how to decode a message, their knowledge would only be valid for a specific time period. Perhaps the most sophisticated Egyptian cryptographic system was developed during the Ptolemaic period, when Greek and Egyptian traditions merged. This system used what we would now call algorithmic encryption. The Rosetta Stone, famous for helping scholars decode hieroglyphs, actually contains an example of this mathematical cryptography. The Egyptian approach to cryptography influenced password security in ways that are still relevant today. They also understood something that modern cybersecurity experts are still trying to teach people: the importance of need-to-know access control. Greek military ciphers, the art of war, while the Egyptians were perfecting sacred cryptography. The ancient Greeks were developing something equally revolutionary: the first systematic military password and cipher systems. The Greeks understood that information was a weapon as powerful as any sword or spear, and they developed cryptographic techniques that wouldn't look out of place in a modern military handbook. The Spartans, famous for their military discipline and tactical innovation, faced a unique challenge: how to coordinate military operations across vast distances while keeping their plans secret from Persian spies who had infiltrated Greek cities throughout the Mediterranean. Our story begins around 500 before the Common Era in the city-state of Sparta. During the height of the Persian Wars, The Spartan solution was a device called the cytail, a wooden rod of a specific diameter around which a leather belt or strip of parchment was wrapped. The message was written along the length of the belt, one letter per turn of the rod. To decode a message, you needed both the encoded belt and a rod of the correct diameter. This is remarkably similar to modern two-factor authentication systems that require both a physical token and knowledge of a PIN or password. When the belt was unwrapped, the letters appeared scrambled and meaningless. By using lines from Homer, texts that every educated Greek had memorized, the Spartans ensured that their passwords were easy for Greek soldiers to remember, but nearly impossible for foreign enemies to guess. A Persian spy might learn Greek vocabulary and grammar, but they were unlikely to have the deep cultural knowledge needed to predict which Homeric phrases the Spartans would choose. The Athenians, with their emphasis on intellectual achievement and democratic governance, developed what might be the first systematic study of cryptanalysis, the science of breaking codes. They discovered that certain letters appeared more frequently than others in Greek text, and that this frequency analysis could be used to break simple substitution ciphers. This was the birth of statistical cryptanalysis, a technique that remains fundamental to modern code breaking. Spartan military units used daily passwords called simala, secret words that changed every 24 hours and were distributed through a carefully controlled chain of command. An Athenian spy might send what appeared to be an innocent letter about trade or family matters, but the real message would be hidden in the first letter of each word, or every third word, or in some other pattern that only the recipient would know to look for. Greek messengers would carry ordinary items like pottery, jewelry, or clothing that contained hidden messages. The password was knowing where to look for the hidden information and how to extract it. This meant that even if one unit's cipher was compromised, the others remained secure. Astyos shaved the head of his most trusted slave, tattooed the message on his scalp, and then waited for the hair to grow back. The slave was then sent to Aristagoras with instructions to shave his head. They recognized that people's choice of passwords often revealed information about their personalities, backgrounds, and vulnerabilities. They established the fundamental principles that still guide modern cryptography: the importance of mathematical analysis, the need for systematic key management, the value of multi-factor authentication, and the understanding that security is an ongoing process of adaptation and improvement. Greek intelligence officers were trained to analyze captured enemy passwords to learn about their opponent's military organization, cultural values, and strategic thinking. The password was knowing that the real message was hidden under the slave's hair. During the Peloponnesian War, Athenian intelligence officers reportedly broke Spartan military codes by analyzing the statistical patterns in intercepted messages. Modern password crackers use similar techniques, analyzing people's social media profiles, personal information, and behavioral patterns to guess their passwords. The Romans later adopted similar methods, hiding messages in the wooden frames of wax tablets, in the bindings of scrolls, and even in the patterns of embroidery on clothing. As the Athenians developed better cryptanalytic techniques, the Spartans developed more sophisticated ciphers. If Athenian passwords referenced democratic ideals and intellectual achievement, this provided insights into Athenian political priorities. As the Spartans improved their security, the Athenians developed new methods of attack. This password would be written on a small wooden tablet and passed to the unit commanders, who would memorize it and then destroy the tablet. A guard wouldn't just ask for the password. They would quote the first half of a Homeric line and expect the correct completion. Sing, goddess, the anger of Pet. When you read every fifth word, it becomes a detailed intelligence report on Spartan troop movements. The password here is knowing that there's a hidden message, and knowing which pattern to follow to extract it would be completed with Achilles, son of Peleus. This ensured that someone couldn't just overhear the password. They needed to understand the cultural context to use it correctly. The unit commanders would then pass the password orally to their subordinates, creating a chain of authentication that could verify the identity of any Spartan soldier. This is exactly the principle behind modern role-based access control systems. But when the recipient wrapped the belt around a rod of the exact same diameter, the message became readable again. But here's what made the Cytail truly revolutionary. It wasn't just a cipher device. It was the world's first physical authentication token. Even if an enemy intercepted your message and figured out that it was encoded using a Cytail, they would still need to know the exact diameter of the rod to decode it. And since the Spartans used different rod diameters for different types of messages and different military units, the system had built-in compartmentalization. A message intended for the commander of the Spartan Navy would use a different rod diameter than a message for the commander of the cavalry. The Cytail system also introduced the concept of something you have authentication. But the Spartans were just getting started. They also developed what might be the first systematic approach to password rotation and key management. Here's how the system worked. Each morning, the commanding general would choose a new password, often based on a line from Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. What made this system particularly clever was the choice of passwords. The Spartans also understood the importance of challenge and response authentication. But perhaps the most sophisticated Greek cryptographic innovation came from Athens, Sparta's great rival. Around 400 before the Common Era, Athenian scholars began analyzing the mathematical patterns in encrypted messages. The Athenians used this knowledge both defensively and offensively. They developed more sophisticated cipher systems that were resistant to frequency analysis. And they used their cryptanalytic skills to break enemy codes. This led to an early example of what modern cybersecurity experts call an arms race between codemakers and codebreakers. One particularly ingenious Athenian innovation was the use of null ciphers, messages where the real information was hidden in plain sight. A surviving example, preserved in the works of the historian Thucydides, appears to be a routine diplomatic correspondence between Athens and one of its allies. The Greeks also developed the concept of steganographic passwords, secret information hidden within seemingly innocent objects. One famous example involves a messenger named Astaios, who wanted to send a secret message to his ally Arist. This technique was so effective that it was used throughout the ancient world. The Greeks also understood the psychological aspects of password security. For example, if Spartan passwords consistently referenced themes of honor and death in battle, this revealed information about Spartan military culture and morale. This psychological approach to cryptanalysis was centuries ahead of its time. The Greek contribution to password security extends far beyond their specific techniques. They also demonstrated something that remains true today. The most secure password systems are those that combine technical sophistication with deep understanding of human psychology and behavior. Roman password systems' empire of secrets. If the Greeks invented systematic military cryptography, the Romans perfected it for over 500 years. The Roman Empire maintained control over territories spanning from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. This vast empire required the most sophisticated information security system the ancient world had ever seen. The Roman approach to password security was fundamentally different from their predecessors. While the Greeks focused on intellectual elegance, and the Egyptians emphasized sacred mystery, the Romans prioritized practical effectiveness and systematic implementation. Every Roman officer, from centurion to legate, could learn this system quickly, and it could be applied to any message in Latin. More importantly, Caesar established formal protocols for how the cipher should be used, when it should be changed, and who was authorized to access different types of encrypted information. Roman military camps used a sophisticated password system called tessera that addressed the fundamental challenges of authentication that we still face today. This password was written on a small wooden tablet, also called a tessera, and passed from guard to guard throughout the camp. But the Romans didn't just rely on a simple password exchange. They developed a comprehensive authentication protocol that included multiple verification steps. They understood that an empire could only be as secure as its weakest communication link. Let's begin our Roman journey in 50 BCE, in the camp of Julius Caesar during his conquest of Gaul. Caesar commanded 8 legions, roughly 40,000 men, spread across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. A becomes D, B becomes E, C becomes F, and so on. Attack at dawn becomes DWWD, FN, DWG, DZQ. This system, now known as the Caesar cipher, was the first standardized encryption system used by a major military force. Every day, he needed to coordinate troop movements, supply operations, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic negotiations. A single intercepted message could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. Caesar's solution was elegantly simple. Shift every letter in the alphabet by 3 positions. But what made Caesar's cipher revolutionary wasn't its complexity, it was its scalability and systematization. Caesar's military commentaries, written in the third person, actually contain several references to his cryptographic practices. He describes how different cipher shifts were used for different types of messages. Routine supply requests used a shift of 3. Troop movement orders used a shift of 5, and strategic intelligence used a shift of 7. This created a hierarchical security system where the sensitivity of the information determined the level of encryption. But Caesar understood something even more important. The weakest link in any security system is human behavior. Here's how the tessera system worked. Each evening, the commanding officer would choose a watchword, a secret password that would change daily. First, the guard would challenge anyone approaching with qui vive. Who goes there? The person would respond with their name and unit. The system verified identity through 3 factors: something you claim to be, something you know, and something you are. Historical records from various Roman campaigns describe password compromises that occurred not through clever enemy cryptanalysis, but through simple human error. Not realizing that different sections of the camp were using different passwords on a rotating schedule. The friend used the old password at the wrong gate, alerting Germanic infiltrators to the existence of multiple password systems. Roman intelligence officers were trained to pose as merchants, travelers, or even enemy soldiers to gather information about enemy password systems and security procedures. The spies would then escape and report back on enemy security procedures, allowing Roman forces to infiltrate enemy camps using the correct passwords and protocols. Roman intelligence officers developed mathematical techniques for analyzing the frequency of letters in encrypted messages, methods for detecting patterns in cipher systems, and psychological approaches for predicting how enemies would choose their passwords. These early cryptanalysts developed techniques that would not be out of place in a modern intelligence agency. Statistical analysis of letter frequencies, pattern recognition in cipher systems, and psychological profiling of enemy commanders to predict their password choices. Then the guard would ask for the tessera, the daily password. But here's where it gets sophisticated. The guard would also ask a secondary question that only a Roman soldier would know how to answer. The Dacians had developed a mathematically sound cipher system, but their choice to base it on religious practices made it vulnerable to enemies who understood their culture. Roman commanders began conducting regular checks to ensure that password protocols were being followed correctly, that guards understood the authentication procedures, and that password information was being properly protected. The manual specifies that passwords should be at least 6 characters long, should not be based on common Latin words, should include both letters and numbers, and should be changed at least weekly. Roman military manuals from the 2nd century CE contain detailed instructions for creating and using various cipher systems, guidelines for choosing secure passwords, and protocols for managing cryptographic information. From the names of gods worshipped in distant provinces, or from the words of poets whose works the barbarians have not read. They discovered that the Dacians were planning a coordinated attack on 3 Roman fortresses simultaneously, but not easily guessable by others. Avoid common words and phrases, and include multiple types of characters. They developed formal training programs for cryptographic personnel, established clear chains of responsibility for security procedures, and created systematic methods for investigating and responding to security breaches. Medieval European armies adopted Roman authentication procedures. Renaissance diplomats used Roman cipher techniques, and even modern military organizations can trace many of their security protocols back to Roman innovations. Every time you change your password, verify your identity through multiple factors, or follow your company's security policies, you're using principles that were first systematized in the camps and headquarters of the Roman legions. Armed with this intelligence, Trajan was able to reinforce the threatened positions and turn the Dacian attack into a devastating defeat. It also meant that captured Roman soldiers could only reveal the passwords and procedures for their specific area of responsibility, limiting the damage from security breaches. Roman military units used different cipher systems for different types of communications. Supply officers used one system, intelligence officers used another, and senior commanders used a third. Who is the mother of Romulus, Rhea Silvia? What river flows through Rome? The Tiber. Roman intelligence officers intercepted a series of encrypted messages between Dacian commanders by analyzing the frequency of symbols and looking for repeated patterns. They determined that the Dacians were using a simple substitution cipher based on their religious calendar, which God protects our eagles. Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus. This is remarkably similar to modern security questions used in two-factor authentication. The Romans also understood the critical importance of password rotation. Historical records show that Roman passwords were changed not just daily, but sometimes multiple times per day during active military operations. During the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, Caesar reportedly changed the tessera every 6 hours to prevent Gallic infiltrators from using captured passwords. But the Romans discovered something that still plagues password security today: the human factor in security breaches. In one documented incident during the Germanic campaigns of 09 CE, a Roman auxiliary unit was nearly overrun because a guard had shared the previous night's password with a friend. This incident led to one of the first recorded security audits in military history. The Romans also developed sophisticated techniques for what we would now call social engineering, the practice of manipulating people to reveal sensitive information. One particularly clever technique involved Roman spies deliberately getting captured by enemy forces, then listening carefully to how the enemy guards challenged and authenticated each other. But perhaps the most sophisticated Roman contribution to password security was their development of systematic cryptanalysis, the science of breaking enemy codes. The Roman historian Suetonius describes how Augustus Caesar employed a team of scholars whose sole job was to analyze intercepted enemy communications. One remarkable example of Roman cryptanalysis comes from the campaigns of Trajan in Dacia. Around 105 Common Era, the Romans then used their knowledge of Dacian religious practices to break the cipher completely. This incident demonstrates something crucial about ancient password security. The most sophisticated technical systems could be undermined by cultural knowledge and psychological insight. The Romans also pioneered the use of codebooks, systematic collections of cipher keys, and authentication procedures. One surviving manual, discovered in the ruins of a Roman fortress in Britain, contains what appears to be the first written password policy in history. The manual also contains psychological guidance for choosing secure passwords. Let the tessera be drawn from the deeds of heroes unknown to the enemy. This is remarkably similar to modern password security advice. Use information that is meaningful to you. The Romans also developed the concept of compartmentalized security, the idea that different people should have access to different levels of classified information based on their roles and responsibilities. This compartmentalization meant that even if one cipher system was compromised, the others remained secure. Perhaps most importantly, the Romans understood that password security was not just a technical challenge, it was a management challenge. The Roman approach to password security influenced military and diplomatic practices for over 1,000 years after the fall of the empire. The Roman legacy in password security is profound. They gave us the concepts of systematic encryption, regular password rotation, multi-factor authentication, security auditing, cryptanalysis, compartmentalized access control, and formal security training. Medieval monastic secrets, the sacred codes. As the Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century CE, the torch of cryptographic knowledge passed to an unlikely group of guardians, medieval monks. For nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 500 to 1500 CE, European monasteries served as the primary centers of learning, literacy, and information security. Picture yourself in the scriptorium of the Abbey of Saint Denis, near Paris. Around 1150 CE, the monastery holds knowledge that could reshape the political landscape of medieval Europe. Correspondence between kings and popes, theological treatises that challenge church doctrine, scientific observations that contradict accepted wisdom, and financial records that reveal the true wealth and power of various noble houses. You're a Benedictine monk named Brother Anselm, and you've spent the last 15 years copying manuscripts, preserving the works of ancient philosophers, and maintaining the abbey's vast library. This wasn't just about keeping information secret. It was about ensuring that only properly qualified people could access and use it. Different levels of monastic hierarchy had access to different types of encrypted information, and the cipher systems themselves were designed to enforce these access restrictions. These ciphers were used for routine monastery business, supply lists, correspondence with other monasteries, and basic theological discussions. The monks didn't just preserve ancient knowledge, they revolutionized it, creating password and cipher systems that were more sophisticated than anything the classical world had produced. To understand medieval cryptography, we need to understand the unique world of the medieval monastery as a key phrase. By removing duplicate letters, this becomes paternoquiscal, which then becomes the first 14 letters of a substitution cipher alphabet. These ciphers were used for preserving and transmitting scientific knowledge, philosophical treatises, and correspondence with universities and other centers of learning. To use this cipher effectively, you needed to know Latin, understand Christian theology, and be familiar with monastic practices. An outsider might be able to learn the technical aspects of the cipher, but they would lack the cultural knowledge needed to choose appropriate key phrases or understand the religious references that often appeared in the encrypted text. The remaining letters of the alphabet would be filled in using a standard pattern that all novices were taught. But you're not just a scribe, you're also a keeper of secrets. This knowledge must be protected not just from thieves and raiders, but from political enemies, rival religious orders, and even other monks within your own community, who might not have the spiritual maturity to handle dangerous information responsibly. The medieval solution was to develop the most sophisticated information security system the world had yet seen, based on the principle that different types of knowledge required different levels of protection and different methods of access control. The foundation of medieval cryptography was the concept of sacred secrecy, the idea that certain knowledge was so powerful or dangerous that it could only be safely handled by people who had undergone specific spiritual and intellectual preparation. Medieval monks developed what we would now call role-based access control centuries before the concept was formalized in computer science. The most basic level was the novice cipher, simple substitution systems that could be learned by monks who were just beginning their cryptographic training. A typical novice cipher might use the phrase pater noster qui is in ciphers. What made this system secure wasn't just the cipher itself, it was the cultural context. The intermediate level was the scholar cipher, more complex systems that required advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and classical literature. One remarkable example comes from the Abbey of Cluny in France, dating to around 1200 Common Era. The monks developed a cipher system based on the mathematical principles described in Euclid's Elements. The password wasn't just a word or phrase, it was a mathematical concept that required years of study to master. Theological disputes that could lead to charges of heresy and scientific observations that contradicted church doctrine. And finally, the entire text would be hidden using steganographic techniques, invisible inks, hidden compartments in book bindings, or messages concealed within illuminated manuscripts. The cipher used geometric relationships to determine letter substitutions. The position of each letter in the alphabet corresponded to a specific point on a geometric figure, around 1250 Common Era. The monks developed a cipher system that combined cryptography with their expertise in manuscript illumination. Only someone who knew the complete decoding system could extract the hidden messages. And since the system required expertise in both cryptography and manuscript illumination, skills that took decades to master, it was virtually impossible for outsiders to break. The password was knowing which decorative elements contained real information and which were merely ornamental, and use passwords, and how these choices can be exploited by attackers. A particular type of flower might represent the letter A, a specific bird might represent B, and so on. In his work, Polygraphy, Trithemius analyzed how people's choice of cipher keys revealed information about their personalities, backgrounds, and vulnerabilities. He recommended using random phrases from obscure texts, combining words from different languages, and including numerical elements based on astronomical calculations that would be difficult for others to predict. He wrote, "A cipher that cannot be broken by the mind may yet be broken by the heart, for men will reveal in their choices what they would never speak with their tongues." He noted that this made their ciphers vulnerable because men choose that which is familiar to their hearts. Modern cybersecurity experts are still grappling with the same fundamental challenge: how to design security systems that are both mathematically strong and resistant to human error and social engineering. The Abbey of Cluny, for example, developed a master cipher system that was shared with its daughter houses throughout Europe. This prevented security breaches at one monastery from compromising the entire network. A message might include encrypted references to recent events that only the legitimate sender would know about, or mathematical puzzles that could only be solved by someone with access to specific texts or astronomical data. Young monks who showed aptitude for mathematics and languages would be gradually introduced to increasingly complex cipher systems over a period of years or even decades. Monks were taught that the ability to keep secrets was a sacred responsibility, that cryptographic knowledge should only be used for legitimate purposes, and that the security of the entire monastic community depended on each individual's commitment to proper security practices. But each monastery had its own unique variation of the system. The cipher techniques developed in monasteries were later adopted by universities, royal courts, and merchant guilds. The ethical frameworks that monks developed for handling secret information became the foundation for modern concepts of professional confidentiality and information security ethics. He specified that different cipher systems should be used for different types of information, that cipher keys should be changed regularly according to the liturgical calendar. Every time you use different passwords for different types of accounts, follow security procedures at work, or think carefully about how to choose a secure password. You're applying principles that were first systematized in the scriptoriums and libraries of medieval monasteries, and that monks should be trained not just in how to use ciphers, but in how to protect them from compromise and mines. And what is familiar to one may be guessed by another who knows his nature. But the system was even more complex. The meaning of each decorative element changed depending on its position on the page, its color, and its relationship to other elements. And the encryption process involved rotating and transforming these geometric relationships according to mathematical formulas. To decode messages encrypted with this system, you needed not just the key phrase, but also a deep understanding of Euclidean geometry. The highest level was the master cipher, extraordinarily complex systems that were known only to the most senior monks and were used for the most sensitive information. PayPal correspondence. These master ciphers often involved multiple layers of encryption. A message might first be encoded using a substitution cipher. Then the result would be encoded using a transposition cipher. One of the most sophisticated examples comes from the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy, the mother house of the Benedictine order. Secret messages were hidden within the decorative borders of religious manuscripts. To an outside observer, these manuscripts appeared to be beautiful but conventional religious texts. Medieval monks also developed what might be the first systematic approach to password psychology, the study of how people choose. The Benedictine monk Johannes Trithemius, writing in the late 15th century, created what many consider the first comprehensive study of cryptographic security. Trithemius observed that monks often chose cipher keys based on their favorite saints, their places of origin, or Latin phrases they had memorized during their theological training. This insight led Trithemius to develop guidelines for choosing secure cipher keys that are remarkably similar to modern password security advice. Trithemius also understood the importance of what we now call operational security, the practices and procedures that protect cryptographic systems from compromise through human error or social engineering. He wrote detailed instructions for how cipher keys should be generated, distributed, stored, and destroyed. One of Trithemius's most important insights was that the security of a cipher system depended not just on the mathematical strength of the encryption algorithm, but on the human factors involved in its use. This understanding of the human element in cryptographic security was centuries ahead of its time. Medieval monasteries also developed sophisticated techniques for what we would now call key management, the processes for generating, distributing, storing, and destroying cryptographic keys. Different monasteries within the same religious order would use related but distinct cipher systems, allowing them to communicate securely while maintaining compartmentalized security. This created a hierarchical security structure where the mother house could communicate with any of its dependencies, but the individual monasteries could not necessarily decode each other's messages. The monks also developed techniques for verifying the authenticity of encrypted messages, early forms of what we now call digital signatures. Perhaps most importantly, medieval monasteries created the first formal training programs for cryptographic personnel. This training wasn't just technical, it was also spiritual and ethical. The medieval monastic approach to cryptography influenced European intellectual development for centuries. The monastic legacy in password security is profound. They gave us the concepts of role-based access control, multi-layered encryption, steganography, password psychology, operational security, key management, message authentication, and formal security training. Islamic Golden Age cryptography, the mathematical revolution. While medieval European monks were developing practical cryptographic systems, scholars in the Islamic world were creating something revolutionary: the mathematical foundations of modern cryptography. From the 8th to the 13th centuries, during what historians call the Islamic Golden Age, Muslim mathematicians, astronomers, here, scholars from across the known world gathered to translate ancient texts, conduct scientific research, and push the boundaries of human knowledge. Most importantly, Al-Kindi discovered that different letters appear with different frequencies in any given language, and that this statistical property could be used to break substitution ciphers. Among them was a polymath named Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, who would write the first systematic analysis of cryptographic security in human history. And philosophers developed analytical techniques that transformed cryptography from an art into a science. Al-Kindi was essentially calculating what we now call the entropy of cryptographic systems, the mathematical measure of their randomness and unpredictability. Our story begins in 9th century Baghdad, in the House of Wisdom, the greatest center of learning in the medieval world. He noted that Arab cryptographers often chose keys based on verses from the Quran. Persian cryptographers used lines from classical poetry, and Turkish cryptographers favored military terminology. Al-Kindi's treatise, a manuscript on deciphering cryptographic messages, written around 850 CE, introduced concepts that remain fundamental to modern cryptanalysis. This was a revolutionary insight. For over 1,000 years, people had been creating and breaking ciphers through intuition, cultural knowledge, and trial and error. He recommended using combinations of words from different languages, including numerical elements based on astronomical calculations, and avoiding any personal information that enemies might be able to discover or guess. Since Arabic script is highly decorative and allows for considerable artistic variation, skilled calligraphers could embed secret information in the curves, dots, and flourishes of seemingly normal religious or literary texts. This required not just cryptographic knowledge, but also expertise in Arabic calligraphy, a skill that took years to master and was largely unknown outside the Islamic world. Al-Kindi showed that cryptanalysis could be systematic and mathematical. The 11th century mathematician Al-Biruni developed a system for generating synchronized cipher keys based on astronomical observations. He wrote, "The wise cryptographer protects not only against the enemy who would break his cipher through mathematical analysis." The 12th century Andalusian mathematician Ibn Qura created cipher systems that used algebraic formulas to transform plain text into ciphertext. The password was knowing which astronomical events to observe and how to convert the observations into cipher keys. His insight that encryption could be based on mathematical algorithms rather than simple substitution patterns was the conceptual breakthrough that made modern digital cryptography possible. Islamic scholars transformed cryptography from a collection of practical techniques into a mathematical science, developed the first systematic approaches to cryptanalysis and password security, and created algorithmic methods that anticipated modern computer cryptography by nearly 1,000 years. But also against the enemy who would break his cipher through knowledge of his heart and mind. Instead, the encryption process involved complex mathematical calculations that would be nearly impossible to reverse without knowledge of the underlying algorithm. He showed that the security of a cipher depended not just on how complex it appeared. The 10th century scholar Ibn Washia wrote a comprehensive treatise on hidden writing techniques, describing methods for creating invisible inks, concealing messages within other texts, and using seemingly innocent objects to carry secret information, but on how many different possible keys it could use, and how difficult it would be for an attacker to test all possible combinations. He demonstrated that by counting how often each symbol appeared in an encrypted message, and comparing these frequencies to the known frequencies of letters in Arabic. A skilled analyst could break even complex substitution ciphers. But Al-Kindi went further. He developed what might be the first password strength calculator, a mathematical method for determining how secure a given cipher system was. This concept, which modern cryptographers call key space analysis, was over 1,000 years ahead of its time. Al-Kindi's work was built upon by later Islamic scholars, particularly the 13th century Syrian mathematician Ibn Abdurrahim, who wrote extensively about what we would now call password security best practices. Ibn Abdurrahim observed that people's choice of cipher keys often followed predictable patterns based on their cultural backgrounds, religious beliefs, and personal experiences. This led Ibn Abdurrahim to develop guidelines for choosing secure cipher keys that are remarkably similar to modern password security advice. Ibn Abdurrahim also understood the importance of what we now call social engineering in cryptographic attacks. The Islamic world also produced the first systematic study of steganography, the art of hiding the very existence of secret messages. One of Ibn Washia's most ingenious techniques involved hiding messages within the patterns of Arabic calligraphy. The password for these steganographic messages was knowing which calligraphic flesh elements carried real information and which were merely decorative. Islamic scholars also made crucial contributions to what we now call key distribution, the problem of how to securely share cryptographic keys between people who are separated by long distances. Since the positions of stars and planets could be calculated independently by astronomers in different locations, Al-Biruni's system allowed cryptographers in distant cities to generate identical cipher keys without having to communicate directly. This system was used extensively by Islamic merchants trading along the Silk Road, allowing them to communicate securely across thousands of miles without risking the interception of cipher keys by bandits or rival traders. Perhaps most importantly, Islamic scholars developed the concept of algorithmic cryptography, cipher systems, based on mathematical algorithms rather than simple letter substitutions. These algorithmic ciphers were far more secure than traditional substitution ciphers because they did not rely on simple letter-for-letter replacements. Ibn Qura's work laid the foundation for modern computer cryptography. The Islamic contribution to password security was profound and lasting. Renaissance innovations, the cipher revolution. The Renaissance brought us Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, the printing press, and the rediscovery of classical learning. But it also brought us some of the most sophisticated cryptographic minds in history, and with them, password systems that represented a quantum leap in security and complexity. The Renaissance approach to cryptography was fundamentally different from what had come before. Medieval cryptography had been largely the domain of monks and scholars, focused on protecting religious and academic knowledge. Renaissance cryptography was driven by the practical needs of an increasingly complex world. International diplomacy, commercial competition, scientific discovery, and political intrigue. Our Renaissance story begins with Leon Battista Alberti, the ultimate Renaissance man, architect, artist, mathematician, and cryptographer. Then rotate the circle one more position and encode the second word. Then rotate it to more positions and encode the third word, and so on. And since the pattern could be based on any sequence of numbers, dates, mathematical formulas, astronomical calculations, or even musical compositions, the number of possible keys was virtually unlimited. The pattern of rotations 312-413-25 would be your secret key, known only to you and your correspondent. He wrote detailed instructions for how cipher disks should be constructed, how rotation patterns should be chosen and changed, and how cryptographic materials should be protected from compromise. Around 1467, Alberti created what many consider the first polyalphabetic cipher, a system that used multiple cipher alphabets within a single message. He wrote, "The most ingenious cipher is worthless if it is used by careless hands or revealed by loose tongues." Alberti was the first cryptographer to systematically analyze how human behavior could compromise even mathematically strong cipher systems, and to develop practical guidelines for minimizing these risks. That rotation patterns be based on information that would be meaningful to the legitimate users, but difficult for enemies to guess, and that different patterns be used for different types of messages. Against mathematical attacks, he recommended using polyalphabetic ciphers with long, complex key sequences. His guidelines included requirements for key length and complexity, procedures for key generation and distribution, schedules for key rotation, and protocols for responding to suspected security breaches. Against physical attacks, he recommended hiding cipher keys and equipment, using multiple backup systems, and employing trusted couriers for key distribution. These machines represented a crucial step toward modern computer cryptography because they separated the cryptographic algorithm from human implementation, reducing the risk of errors and making it possible to use more complex cipher systems. And numbers should not be based on common words or phrases, and should be changed at least monthly. Previous cipher systems required careful manual calculation for each letter of the message, creating opportunities for errors that could compromise security. Belasso's machine eliminated most of these human factors, making it possible to encrypt and decrypt messages quickly and accurately. Belasso's machine used a series of rotating wheels, each inscribed with letters and numbers, to generate polyalphabetic ciphers automatically. The password was the initial setting of the wheels, which could be set according to a predetermined key phrase or numerical sequence. He also recommended that different keys be used for different types of messages, and that backup keys be maintained in case primary keys were compromised. An increase in encrypted messages between certain courts might indicate alliance negotiations, but also careful attention to human factors, systematic analysis of threats and vulnerabilities, and comprehensive policies and procedures for managing cryptographic systems. These protocols included techniques for sending dummy messages to confuse traffic analysis, using multiple communication channels to obscure message patterns, and varying message lengths and timing to avoid revealing information through communication patterns. Changes in the length or frequency of messages might suggest military preparations, and threat analysis created the first mechanical cipher systems and established the conceptual foundations for modern computer cryptography. The use of special couriers or unusual routing might indicate particularly sensitive communications. Against social attacks, he recommended careful selection and training of cryptographic personnel, compartmentalized security systems, and regular changes of cipher keys. Alberti understood that the fundamental weakness of all previous cipher systems was their static nature. Once an enemy learned your cipher alphabet, they could decode all of your messages. He identified three main categories of cryptographic threats: mathematical attacks, physical attacks, and social attacks. Alberti's solution was to make the cipher alphabet change throughout the message. But Trithemius's later work, particularly his Steganographia, represented a new approach to cryptographic security that combined mathematical rigor with psychological insight. But Alberti's real innovation was unjust the cipher itself. It was his approach to password security. Alberti's cipher disk consisted of two concentric circles, each inscribed with the letters of the alphabet. The inner circle could be rotated relative to the outer circle, creating different cipher alphabets depending on the relative position of the circles. The password was just the initial setting of the disk. It was also the pattern for changing the setting throughout the message. For example, you might start with the inner circle rotated 3 positions clockwise, encode the first word of your message. This created a cipher system with enormous key space. Even if an enemy captured your cipher disk, they would still need to know the rotation pattern to decode your messages. Alberti also understood the importance of what we now call operational security. Alberti recommended that cipher disks be made by trusted craftsmen who didn't understand their cryptographic purpose. But perhaps Alberti's most important contribution was his insight that cryptographic security depended not just on the mathematical strength of the cipher, but on the human factors involved in its use. This understanding of the human element in cryptographic security was revolutionary. The Renaissance also gave us Johannes Trithemius, whom we encountered earlier in our discussion of medieval cryptography. Trithemius developed what might be the first comprehensive threat model for cryptographic systems, a systematic analysis of all the different ways that cipher systems could be attacked and compromised. For each category of threat, Trithemius developed specific countermeasures. Trithemius also developed what might be the first systematic approach to password policy, formal rules for how cryptographic keys should be chosen, used, and managed. These password policies were remarkably sophisticated. Trithemius specified that cipher keys should be at least 20 characters long, should include both letters. The Renaissance period also saw the development of the first cipher machines, mechanical devices that automated the encryption and decryption process. The most famous Renaissance cipher machine was created by Giovanni Battista Balasso around 1553. What made Balasso's machine revolutionary was its reliability and speed. The Renaissance also gave us the first systematic study of what we now call traffic analysis, the practice of analyzing patterns in encrypted communications to gather intelligence, even when the messages themselves cannot be decoded. The Venetian diplomat and cryptographer Giovanni Soro, working in the early 16th century, developed techniques for analyzing the frequency, timing, length, and routing of encrypted diplomatic messages to infer information about political and military developments. Soro observed that even when diplomatic ciphers could not be broken, the pattern of communications often revealed important information. This insight led Soro to develop what might be the first communications security protocols, systematic procedures for disguising not just the content of messages, but also their existence, timing, and routing. The Renaissance contribution to password security was profound. Renaissance cryptographers transformed cryptography from a medieval craft into a modern science, developed the first systematic approaches to operational security. Most importantly, Renaissance cryptographers understood that effective security required not just mathematical sophistication. Enlightenment mechanical systems, the precision revolution, the 18th century brought us the age of enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and a fundamentally new approach to cryptography that emphasized mechanical precision, mathematical analysis, and systematic methodology. This period gave us password systems that were more secure, more reliable, and more similar to modern computer-based authentication than anything that had come before. And scientific method, emphasis on mechanical precision and reliability, and belief that complex problems could be solved through systematic analysis and careful engineering. The Enlightenment approach to cryptography reflected the broader intellectual currents of the age. Faith in reason, each about 6 inches in diameter and inscribed with the 26 letters of the alphabet in a different random order. The discs were mounted on a central axle and could be arranged in any order and rotated independently. The star of this era is Thomas Jefferson. Yes, the same Jefferson who wrote the Declaration of Independence and served as the 3rd President of the United States. With 36 discs that could be arranged in any order, the system had over 371 trillion possible arrangements. He also developed comprehensive procedures for key management, operational security, and threat analysis that were remarkably sophisticated for their time. Even if an enemy captured a Jefferson cipher wheel, they would still need to know the correct disk arrangement to decode messages. But Jefferson was also a brilliant inventor and cryptographer who created what many consider the most sophisticated mechanical cipher system of the pre-computer age. He understood that people's choice of cipher keys often revealed information about their personalities and backgrounds, and he developed guidelines for choosing keys that would be secure against both mathematical analysis and psychological attack. Then rotate them to spell out your message along one horizontal row. Each message was encrypted with a completely different key, making cryptanalytic attacks virtually impossible, and that arrangements be changed frequently enough to prevent enemies from accumulating enough encrypted text to mount successful cryptanalytic attacks. The books used as cipher sources were carefully chosen to be widely available, but not obviously cryptographic. Popular novels, religious texts, or technical manuals that would not arouse suspicion if found in someone's possession. His insight that cryptographic strength could be measured mathematically, rather than just estimated intuitively, was a crucial step toward the development of modern computer cryptography. He also developed procedures for securely distributing cipher keys, protecting cipher equipment, and training personnel in proper cryptographic practices. Unlike previous cipher systems that relied on human memory and calculation, Jefferson's wheel cipher was nearly impossible to use incorrectly, but also to prevent the leakage of information through subtle patterns or physical characteristics. Euler showed that the security of a cipher depended not just on how complex it appeared. Kossiski showed that even sophisticated cipher systems could be vulnerable if they were not implemented carefully, but on how many different possible keys it could use, and how difficult it would be for an attacker to test all possible combinations. The password was a page number, line number, and word number that indicated where in the book to start the cipher key. Once used, that position in the book was marked and never used again. The machine itself enforced the security protocol, eliminating most opportunities for human error. You would then copy down the letters from any other row as your encrypted message. To decrypt, the recipient would arrange their disks in the same sequence, spell out the encrypted message, and then look for the row that contained readable text. In the 1790s, Jefferson invented what he called a wheel cipher, a mechanical device consisting of 36 wooden disks. Here's how Jefferson's system worked. You would arrange the disks according to a predetermined sequence. What made Jefferson's system revolutionary was its combination of mechanical reliability and cryptographic strength. Jefferson's system also had enormous key space, the total number of possible cipher keys. But Jefferson understood that mechanical reliability was only part of the solution. Jefferson specified that different disk arrangements should be used for different types of communications, that arrangements should be changed regularly according to a predetermined schedule, and that backup arrangements should be maintained in case primary keys were compromised. Jefferson's approach to password security was also psychologically sophisticated. Jefferson recommended that disk arrangements be based on random sequences rather than meaningful patterns, that different arrangements be used for different correspondence. The Enlightenment period also saw the development of the first systematic approaches to what we now call one-time passwords, cipher keys that are used only once and then discarded. French military engineers in the 1760s developed a system where each message used a unique cipher key derived from a book that both sender and receiver possessed. This system was remarkably secure because even if an enemy intercepted and decoded one message, they gained no information that would help them decode future messages. The French system also demonstrated sophisticated understanding of key distribution and management. The Enlightenment period also gave us the first systematic study of what we now call password entropy, the mathematical measure of how unpredictable and secure a password or cipher key is. The Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler, working in the mid-18th century, developed mathematical techniques for calculating the strength of different cipher systems. Euler's work laid the mathematical foundation for modern password security analysis. The Enlightenment also produced the first systematic analysis of what we now call side-channel attacks, methods of breaking cryptographic systems by analyzing physical information that leaks from the encryption process. The German cryptographer Friedrich Kasiski, working in the late 18th century, developed techniques for breaking polyalphabetic ciphers by analyzing patterns in the encrypted text that revealed information about the underlying cipher key. Kasiski's work demonstrated the importance of what we now call implementation security, the idea that cryptographic systems must be designed not just to resist direct mathematical attacks. Lessons from the ancient world as we reach the end of our journey through ancient passwords. It's remarkable how many of the challenges and solutions we've encountered are still with us today. The clay tablets of Babylon and the smartphones of today are separated by millennia of technological advancement, but they resolving the same essential human problem. How do we keep our secrets safe while still being able to access them when we need them? The Mesopotamian merchants who created the first ciphers were dealing with the same fundamental challenge we face when we log into our bank accounts. How do you prove you are who you say you are to someone who you unsee you? Their solution, shared secret knowledge, remains the foundation of every password system in use today. The Roman soldiers who changed their passwords daily understood something that modern cybersecurity experts are still trying to teach us. Static passwords are vulnerable passwords. Their development of role-based access control, where different levels of monastic hierarchy had access to different types of encrypted information, established principles that guide modern enterprise security systems. The tessera system, with its daily password changes and multi-factor authentication, anticipated modern security practices by nearly 2,000 years. We're still trying to balance security with convenience, complexity with memorability, and protection with accessibility, but also deep understanding of human psychology, careful attention to operational procedures, and systematic approaches to threat analysis and risk management. You re a link in an unbroken chain of humans who understood that some things are worth keeping secret, and that the price of security is eternal vigilance. We'll discover how the first computer scientists adapted medieval cipher techniques for electronic systems, why password became the most common password in the world, and how a simple typing mistake in 1961 led to the first computer security breach in history. Their insight that cryptographic strength could be measured and analyzed systematically transformed cryptography from an art into a science. The medieval monks, who used prayer phrases as cipher keys, discovered the importance of choosing passwords that are meaningful to you, but meaningless to others. Exactly what security experts recommend today. The Islamic scholars who developed frequency analysis and algorithmic cryptography created the mathematical foundations that make modern computer security possible. The Renaissance diplomats who developed the first comprehensive password policies understood that human behavior is often the weakest link in any security system. Sweet dreams, and remember, your secrets are only as safe as the methods you use to protect them. Their wisdom, accumulated over 4 millennia, still guides us in our eternal quest to keep our secrets safe. Their systematic approaches to threat analysis, operational security, and key management established frameworks that still guide modern cybersecurity practice. And Thomas Jefferson's mechanical cipher showed us that the best security systems are those that minimize the impact of human error, a principle that guides modern computer security design. But perhaps the most important lesson from our journey through ancient passwords is this: the fundamental challenge of authentication hasn't changed in 4,000 years. The ancient world teaches us that effective password security requires not just technical sophistication. Every time you type your password, remember, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. In our next episode, we'll explore how these ancient principles evolved into the computer passwords we know today. Until then, the next time you create a password, think about the Babylonian merchants, Roman centurions, medieval monks, Islamic mathematicians, Renaissance diplomats, and Enlightenment inventors who came before you. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the ancient world of passwords.